So after talking about the new 6 a.m. album, Modern Vintage, I felt that it's time. It's time to finally talk about Nikki Sixx's other band. The one that, everybody knows. Like your mom knows it very well. And that's not a your mom joke. That's probably just a true statement. Motley Crue, of course, is who we're talking about, and it's critical to talk about them right now here in 2014, considering the band is retiring. They're on their farewell tour. Whenever some of you watch this, that farewell tour is no doubt concluded. And I'm not here really to be a historian. I'm not here really to present you with everything that went on and really be, do the job of VH1's Behind the Music. It's really not my purpose. The band review is really my reflection of this group, what I think about this group. But I also want to know what you guys think about this group, what you guys think about Motley Crue. And I want you to do that in the comments below, so as you are listening to what I have to say, let me know what you guys think about Motley Crue. Please, that would be great. And so let's get started. Motley Crue, the very first thing that I think about whenever I think about Motley Crue is the 1980s. Motley Crue is the perfect snapshot of what the 1980s were like with heavy metal. Because in 1981, whenever they debuted with Too Fast for Love, which was an album that they made very, very quickly, on a very, very small budget, something that easily could have gone horribly wrong. It sparked a revolution. It sparked something, it really did. Because really, whenever you make a record for the cheap amount that they did, and the time frame that they did, it has one or two effects. Either A, it sucks, or, it really doesn't do much. It doesn't move any mountains. It's a great album, but nobody really catches on to it. Or B, it's kind of this flash-of-the-pan, amazing jump start to a revolution. It's a strange phenomenon how that tends to work. But it is a proving ground that sometimes the catalyst to success can sometimes begin out of nothing. It's a great actual representation for Motley Crue, who were able to sort of parallel Metallica, and two of them really helped to forge matching branches of heavy metal. Motley Crue with glam, and Metallica, of course, with thrash metal. And this was something that was both taking place in around the same area of California, and in around the same time of history in the 1980s. Now, we all know that the 80s were also a time of excess, and Motley Crue was certainly a band that was able to really indulge in that. The parties, the concerts, the raucous lifestyle all became very, very famous for Motley Crue. They had brushes with death. They actually had brushes of accidentally killing people. Overdoses, everything. Excess was certainly one of the key parts of Motley Crue's playbook. But whenever I think about the music, whenever I think about the 1980s musically for Motley Crue, it's impeccable. Think about some of the albums that we're talking about here. Shout at the Devil, Too Fast for Love, Theater of Pain, Girls, 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 and it's all culminated with Dr. Feelgood. Dr. Feelgood, by the way, went to #1 and was produced by everybody's favorite asshole, Bob Rock. But this is something that Bob Rock actually did really well. However, it was a precursor of things to come because of Kickstart My Heart. We heard that wah pedal that we, of course, heard in future Metallica releases. Funny how everything kind of comes back to one another, right? I know what I'm doing. But these are albums that really spotlight the really what glam metal was all about, and really Dr. Feelgood, I think, is the real deal whenever it comes to representing glam metal as a whole, even though it was recorded and it was released in a time frame, in an area of time when glam metal was almost ready to be kind of pushed out the door. They didn't know. But it's really the ideal snapshot of what glam metal is all about, kind of what the lifestyle was all about, not to mention also what the music was all about. This is something that was very aggressive. It had a lot of the same attributations to a thrash metal, only it was something that had also a little bit more heart behind it, with a song such as Without You, and also a little bit more of a topic of romance is something that comes up, and decadence also. Whereas with thrash metal, you definitely heard lyrics and lyricism of a different variety, especially during that time of life in the 1980s, and really still to this day. But those albums are really just what Motley Crue was all about in the 1980s, and it was something that really was a great way to kind of to handshake the lifestyle, and because the music definitely felt just as larger than life as the band did, and it certainly gave them an edge. A band such as a Poison or something like that may have had more, girls throwing their panties at them because, Bret Michaels was singing about love and things like that, but Motley Crue, they were getting the wild ones. They were getting the wild and crazy chicks, the ones that really didn't give a flying rat's ass who the fuck told them what to do. They were going to that concert and they were doing everything in their power to make sure they banged one of the members of the band. Yeah, craziness. Then the 90s happened, and of course Vince Neil left the band, and there was a lot of turmoil. And this is a period where it almost seemed like the planets that had all aligned for the glam metal boom in the 1980s finally distanced themselves from one another just enough where the dream was over. Because this happened in 92, which is right around the time whenever grunge was getting huge, and it was also right around the time when a lot of the other glam metal bands were starting to disband, or at least really, really suffer some really hard times. So it was almost like Motley Crue was able to really avoid a very large-scale catastrophe, but they had a lot of in-house problems, so it probably didn't feel that way. It probably felt a lot like they had a catastrophe that was going on for a time period between probably about 91 to 97, roughly, give or take. Now, whenever they all reunited and released Generation Swine in the latter portion of the 90s, it was kind of a great event, and it was initially a pretty decent-sounding album. In fact, I remember that this was my first exposure to Motley Crue, mainly because whenever I was younger, at that time period, alternative was a huge thing, and Motley Crue was starting to force itself back into the mainframe with the release of this album. And they were starting to get to be this revitalization of their music. And Generation Swine was a decent disc, but it was a huge flop. It was a failure. Really, it was the first taste of failure that this band had really suffered as a group. That was just this major that really had this much effort behind them as a foursome to really lead to very little. The 2000s, however, have been kinder. This is something where the band has kind of optioned to distance their albums out a little bit more, and instead focus a lot more on touring and focus on the live experience, to focus on really what has driven these people to love glam metal for all of these years, to really focus on what made these fans in the 80s so crazy, and what has really geared a lot more individuals ever since then to really turn toward this style of music and really have it influence them. You think about bands out there, some of which we don't really, talk too kindly about on this channel, even such as the Black Veil Brides, and there's definitely roots in glam metal. There's definitely roots that are there. So this is a group that has certainly had a huge influence on bands here in the modern age, and it's what you would expect. Overall, this is a group whose material is really, it's very captivating. It's captivating for somebody who is a big thrash metal fan to listen to glam and try to do so without being completely and totally turned off by it, because thrash has a very different philosophy. But what I like about Motley Crue is that they have enough ferocity, they have enough bite to them, that it makes them a very easy band to sort of transition into after listening to some thrash, or as a thrash metal fan. And they also have enough heart where it's something that's very different, very unique. So whenever you listen to Motley Crue's 1980s discography, and you can even hear a lot of this with some of their more modern material, though it's, I gotta say, the 80s, the classic material is where it's at. There's still so much to really be impressed by, to be floored by. To understand why these guys are as big as they are is because the music itself really resembled these individuals, these characters, these men. The music was larger than life. It was really fueled by a lot of excess, and it felt excessive. It felt everything that it needed to feel. And really, with Bob Rock taking the producer's chair and giving that wah pedal effect to kickstart my heart, and doing a lot to polish up the sound of Motley Crue at the latter part of the 1980s, it really just made all of the sense in the world. Now, of course, these individuals have all gone off and started side projects, have been members of side projects, have done their own post-Crue activities while Crue is even still active. And these guys are still continuing to be hugely influential to other bands, not to mention to music in general. I mean, Motley Crue is certainly one of the biggest bands in the world. It's a group that whenever you consider the small pantheon of glam metal groups that sort of have survived the tide and have made a name for themselves and have really now started to do the reunion and now finally the farewell tours in 2014 and in this stage of the game, Motley Crue is a band that you would expect to be here, so we should be very pleased and happy that they've made it here. Because trust me, there's a lot of things that could have happened that easily could have prevented that. In fact, there's a lot of things that could have prevented some of the classic 1980s albums. This is something that, this is a group that easily could have been a 2 to 3 album pony, and that was it. Of course, Nikki Sixx is now a member of 6am. He was a member of the Brides of Destruction. Vince Neil has done his own projects. He was also involved in IndyCar racing for a short period of time, right around the time of him quitting the band or being dismissed, all depending on which side you're on. It's like fucking Team Edward or Team Jacob. And Mick Mars still looks like a cat. I'm just going to throw that out there. But as far as these guys are concerned, as far as my final thoughts and ultimately my final verdict on this group, really regardless to what kind of metal fan that you are, regardless to what kind of rock fan you are, Motley Crue always is going to have a place. If you enjoy any sort of rock music, if you enjoy aggressive or non-aggressive, this is certainly a band that will easily captivate you. It's something that'll be loud and raucous and kind of obnoxious at times. It's not always going to be perfect. In fact, it's a lot of times it's just going to sound like a clustered mess of fun. But that's it. It's fun. It's fun music. It's music that if you take too seriously, you really start to miss the point. Because if there's one thing about glam metal that made it what it was the fact that it was rooted in the fact that every day was a party. Isn't that the best metaphor for the 80s? And isn't that metaphor for the 80s also the best metaphor for Motley Crue? Think about it. Overall, this is a group that's alright in my book. It's not a group that I listen to as much as I used to. However, it's also not a group that if something pops on the radio or I just happen to have it pop up on my playlist or I get the hankering, then I'm going to shut off. Motley Crue is always one of those groups that really allured me a lot more than the Poisons of the world. And the funny part about it is I've never seen Motley Crue live, but I have seen Poison live. Good show. Saw them with Skid Row and Dokken. That was back in 2009. It was pretty cool. Overall, if you like this group, there's a damn good reason why. If you don't, chances are you're taking it a little too seriously. Either you just don't like the music, and if that's the case, that's fine. Or you don't like hell-raising, glam metal. Your prerogative, I guess. What do you guys think about Motley Crue? I know I asked this at the onset of the video, but I'm going to ask you and remind you again. What are your thoughts about Motley Crue? Let me know in the comments below. And why don't you let me know also in the comments below what the next group is that I should do a band review on. Like, subscribe, all that other fun stuff too.